Welcome back. You're still watching Finweek Money Matters. The terrible events at Marikana in August 2012, in which 44 people died, serve as a painful reminder of what happens when collective bargaining fails. 2 years after the massacre, the efficacy of the collective bargaining system is called into question with increasing frequency. This week, we debate whether the collective bargaining system still works, whether more unions should be present during wage negotiations, and whether the current legislation is sufficient to protect companies, unions and labourers. But joining me to discuss all of this is Mamokgethi Moloyane. She's a Chief Mining and Labour Research Analyst at Creative Voodoo. We have Vic van Rensburg, Director of the International Labour Organization, and Albert Wocke. He's the Associate Professor at GIBS. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. I'm going to start with you, Mamokgethi. Perhaps let's look at the bargaining councils as they are now. Are they working? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Or is there a change brewing here?
There should be a change brewing, because we have noted how the current collective bargaining hasn't really been debated or engaged or even changed since the mid-1990s, when the Labour Relations Act was introduced and it was promulgated. So perhaps it is time for change, given that the economy has changed, given that the working conditions and the definition of work itself had changed, but also many other factors, including labour relations itself, has changed. Perhaps it is time then that we as the country look at our collective bargaining and say what needs to happen in it, how can we make it relevant and applicable to now.
Vic, what needs to happen? How do we make it relevant here?
I think South Africa's start with collective bargaining at NEDLAC level and permeating down to the industries was actually an example to the rest of the emerging economies of how to do it. What I think has happened over time, we've got an old model that we haven't kept pace with the changing times. Our bargaining councils are old. Many of them are not as functioning as well as before. NEDLAC has been neglected by the parties that used to play there, the captains of industry, the ministers and the top union leaders. So we've got the structures. What needs to happen now is we need to get back into the mode of revamping our existing structures. There's no other way to go. Collective bargaining is here to stay, particularly in a country with such a large social deficit as us. You can't go the way of the first world, where you run around the periphery of dealing with unions.
Professor Wocke, I renamed you there, but bargaining councils, Vic says they are here to stay. Are you in agreement?
Yes, absolutely. They've got such a history behind them. And look at them a bit beyond salary negotiations. Look at them for managing basic conditions, basic rights of workers. I think they're a pretty good model. Where we're running into problems at the moment, and exactly as Vic is saying, is where you've got structures that are supposed to be feeding into the bargaining councils, the industrial bargaining councils. That's failing. The other problem you've got is that you've got union rivalry coming into play now. And so you've got established players who are in the bargaining councils, and you've got players from outside who are coming in, and that's causing a fair amount of tension. Similarly, you've got, on the employer side, you've got bodies that represent big groups of employers, and you've got people saying that they're not representative. But going into the future, I think the big challenge is going to be facing is NUMSA and unions like that are organizing according to value chains, which are going to require several bargaining councils to amalgamate if NUMSA gets sufficient support to do that.
While we're on this issue, we have been, I think the story of the week, or perhaps even the year, if we're looking at labour issues and trade unions, is the expulsion of NUMSA from COSATU. Mamokgethi, perhaps what does this exactly mean? What does this mean for South Africa going forward? How are you reading this?
Well, it means, I've heard comments that it would mean the end of COSATU. I'm saying it means the end of COSATU as it is known now. It does not necessarily mean that there won't be a federation, but also it means that there are far more issues that they are arguing about, not just about whether they are differing ideologically. And one of the things that has come to mind amidst this expulsion of NUMSA is that for all the talks that they are doing about differing in ideology, nobody's talking about the what will they do with the investment that they have? Or is this a struggle for power, or is this a struggle for resources? And so we haven't really focused on that, and that's an issue that I think it's at the center of what's really happening. Ideology might be the driving point of why the fight is starting, but it is a struggle for resources and a struggle for power as to who controls and who is seen as the leading union that controls COSATU.
Make a dawn of a new area.
Yes, I think what, when they say in Africa, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And I think what we need to be careful is that we don't allow for the what is not an abnormal thing to happen, but something that is big in South Africa, is for a breakaway in the union movement. But we mustn't write off COSATU, most definitely not. They're a powerful body and will remain one. I think the control for COSATU, we also got the court case of NUMSA that's going on. NUMSA still wants to stay in COSATU with its supporters. Should they manage that, you'll have a COSATU Congress, and there could be a change in power at the top if Zwelinzima Vavi and the NUMSA guys are managing to stay in. If they are expelled, and that looks the most likely route, then you're going to find what kind of alliances and bedfellows are there going to be. There could be some very strange bedfellows emerging from this, because NUMSA will have to form an alliance with other unions and also possibly with some political parties. I mean, it would be a crazy idea of having a NUMSA, EFF, AMCU kind of alliance. It sounds crazy, but we need to see what's going to pan out. Yeah. But what we need to do is keep the rules going, make sure that the environment and the structure in which all this play out happens, to make sure that we minimize the destruction of our industry. That's important.
Albert, how are you reading this? Minimizing the destruction on the industry, is this something that we can do?
It's something we have to do. I'm reading it slightly differently. NUMSA's this isn't a thing that started yesterday. It started December 2012 when NUMSA took a decision that they're going to be organizing according to value chains. And if you look at the bigger picture of South Africa's labor market, unions have not been growing. So the only way you're going to grow as a trade union in South Africa is to poach or recruit other unions members. So the decision to organize according to a value chain means that KNUMS is in petrol pump attendants, but now they're going upstream. They're going to start organizing, or in fact they have. We're seeing that they're getting recognition agreements all over the place in the chemical industry, as for instance. And then you control that industry, and that's got implications for the bargaining council. It's also got implications for political arrangements. I'm totally with Vic on that one, where NUMSA has to engage, no matter if they're in COSATU or out of COSATU, they have to engage with a party to negotiate to get any of their objectives there. And I'm very optimistic. I'm saying that we finally are moving to a situation where we're going to have social partnerships. It's coming into place. We need a strong, independent labour movement to engage with business, to engage with government. My concern is business hasn't got a big and strong enough voices yet, and I hope we can sort that out.
But also we must also take into consideration the fact that when NUMSA decided to go and organize in those sectors that they were not necessarily organizing in, it was because workers were saying, we are feeling neglected, our unions are no longer paying attention to key issues that we are raising at workers. Our leaders have become business unionists, far removed from the day-to-day issues that we as workers are raising, and therefore we feel neglected. Then NUMSA occupied that space, and therefore it speaks about the change within trade unions themselves as to is leadership suddenly moving away from speaking issues that are for workers, or is leadership has lost control of wanting to be a unionist. And the minute the workers realized that, they felt that we can then leave a union that we had already been in for many years, that we have felt had served us. We can go and join a sister union within the same federation because we are no longer being serviced.
Final comment from you, Vic. Unfortunately, we have run out of time.
I think what is important is that business cannot step back like they did in the Marikana issue and try and watch two unions fighting each other. Line managers have to be at the forefront of this debate going forward, because that's how we're going to keep some sanity in this process about where the players eventually find their homes. But I think that within the unions, we've also seen the metal workers union that's been launched now to counter the NUMSA breakaway with its old leadership. Interesting to see how many people will follow that route. But last point is, last week the Deputy President, or 2 weeks ago, the Deputy President held a Labour Indaba on the 4th of November. Very key points were discussed, and leaders from all sides have come together to look at these critical issues in the labour market. I think the media have not caught on to the importance of that event, and we need to watch that space.
I will definitely be watching that space. Thank you so much to our guests today, bringing in their insight, especially with everything that is unfolding in the labour space. That's all for this week's edition of Finweek Money Matters. Again, thank you to Mamokgethi Moloyane. She's a Chief Mining and Labour Research Analyst at Creative Voodoo, Vic van Rensburg, Director of the International Labour Organization, and Albert Wocke, the Associate Professor at GIBS. Well, until same time next week, we'll see you again. Have a great weekend.